spurs into each of these sites. But when you think about it, they had all these side tracks. And I talked to an old trainman one time, and he said, we got trains backed up on the side track and waiting to get in Oak Ridge from here to Cincinnati.
Let's talk a little bit about that. We're rolling now. And let's talk a little bit about Groves and the things you were just commenting on.
Okay. One of the things that some additional support for K-25 and Y-12 as far as in pursuing the getting enough products for a bomb was called an S-50 project. This project was located at the K-25 powerhouse area, and General Grove decided that he needed to go to a third prospect, and this is when he determined that I want this building built within 90 days and in operation. Well, actually, it was built and within operation 69 days, which again was amazing even for that time frame. But they did have a considerable number of leaks with this particular project. Some of those were material problems of getting the right materials, but incidentally, General Groves had the authority to determine where particular materials were on trains maybe sent out from various plants or sites, and he had the authority to have that sent to Oak Ridge. So you can imagine some other folks on the other end expecting to receive some of this material, and particularly in wartime, that they were having some problem with that, no doubt, as far as their manufacturing processes. But it turned out that the S-50 site wasn't as successful as they had hoped, but on the other hand, it was a proven method, and there was some of that method, and some of the production was used along with K-25 and Y-12 as far as incorporating into the bomb.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Moving right along, and we were talking about the Cold War and everything. Basically, it was in 1964 when the facility was put on standby. What did you do when the facility was put on standby?
Okay, I left K-25 in 1951, but a good part of K-25, part of it was already shut down then at that time. Some of K-27 was shut down at that time as well. So those are two buildings that, even though K-27 was after 1945, it's just almost immediately after, but they were shut down, and it was kind of a heartbreaker to a lot of folks. You know, it meant livelihood. You're going to be laid off, and you can understand that, and this sort of thing. And a lot of folks were uprooted, moved to other areas. Some went, to Paducah, Portsmouth sites later on. But it's kind of like a lot of people were scattered throughout the U.S., various locations, aerospace and otherwise.
Okay. Let's talk about some job-specific questions about what you did during your time there, and what kind of jobs did you have associated with K-25, and give your job titles and approximate years that you worked those jobs.
I started out at an entry-level job. It was a maintenance mechanic trainee. Advanced from that, I served a 4 years apprenticeship at that. That's basically at K-25. What you did was mechanical work, rigging work, pipe fitting. You would do copper tubing type of work, silver soldering, as well as running copper tubing, operating equipment, overhead cranes, forklifts, portable cranes, pretty much of what might be along the equipment line. But it was actually pretty much based in the maintaining or removal and installation of the axial flow compressors or converters, or the motors, maybe a motor change. We did a lot of these as far as upgrading, changing motors, changing impellers, some of the converters, compressors. Those were upgraded and for additional production. From there, I was laid off in 1951, but when I came back, well, I went to I worked overseas 4 years in construction, then I came back to X10 over there and worked there as a millwright, which is mechanical type work again. For 7.5 years, I was going to be laid off there and was transferred back to K-25. I worked there for a few months as a maintenance mechanic. I was promoted to frontline supervisor. Within a year or so, I was promoted to general supervisor. And then from there, I was promoted to a maintenance coordinator, to general foreman. And then later years, I was promoted to a plant shift superintendent. And then the last 4 years I was there, I was headed up an engineering group, field engineering. So that pretty much was a kind of a nutshell of my 40 years.
It's an impressive career. It sounds like you really worked your way up through the ranks, I guess you could say.
Well, I had opportunities, and I had a lot of folks that gave me some opportunities, but I was very interested in learning all the processes, learning the buildings. Had the opportunity to work in every building out there, so that put me in a position of having the edge on some other folks, of knowing the buildings, knowing the people, knowing the processes. So that helped.
Okay. What would you say was your most challenging, or one of your most challenging assignments, as either an individual or a group, while you worked at K-25?
Probably one of the most challenging would have been when we had a complete cell change. That would mean removal of the motors, the compressors, the converters, pulling out the control valves, everything out of inside the cell. You put them back in, you fit them up, you line up your motors, you do all the other equipment, and you do that within 8 hours. That was very challenging. We were able to do that in the early days, and later years it took 3 days to do it. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. What would you say over your career was your most significant accomplishment? K-25.
I guess I've got two that run pretty parallel.
Okay.
One was being a shift superintendent. Shift superintendent, you're over the whole site of nights and weekends. So at times, we might have 900 employees under you. So that was pretty significant. On the other hand, I had the opportunity to get involved in what was called a preliminary work for a Tiger Team review. Tiger Team being DOE had a team of somewhere between 60 and 75 people, and they would come in and look at all disciplines of work, engineering, look at all today's world as far as RCLA, CERCLA, all the environmental rules, and look at OSHA and this sort of thing. I was able to lead a team, and again, going back, part of that knowing the plant, knowing the equipment, knowing what was there. So I was able to lead a team of folks that I got to select who they would be, and we worked for about almost a year full time on that, and were able to go out and get involved and determine what the environmental problems were, what the OSHA type problems were, looking at the conduct of operations, conduct of maintenance, and those type of things. And what really was the good part about it is not just being involved with it, but it's be able to select the folks that would help me with this, and some other people that worked jointly with me. But from the viewpoint of when it was all over with and they completed their audit of us, we came out K-25 to be the top site of 33 sites in DOE, the best score. So that was a lot of satisfaction. Tremendous amount of hard work, but it was very satisfying to see the end result. So that was, to me, that was a major issue. And it was a real challenge, but I enjoyed every minute of it.
Okay, good answer. You did a lot of supervisory work and management work. How many people did you typically oversee?
Initially, as a frontline supervisor, approximately 20, and as I was promoted on into additional responsibility, Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 450 on the average prior to going into his chief superintendent's job.
What sort of management difficulties did you encounter?
Well, some of the things you'd encounter would be lack of materials. Might not arrive in time. By and large, I had great cooperation of the craft people, of other supervisors, other managers. Worked very well together on that. But what you did, you identified your problems and you found ways to overcome those problems and not let that hold up your project. Sometimes it wasn't easy, but you found ways to do it, and I'm saying in a safe manner. I'm very happy to say that all my years in the craft and otherwise, and over a period of time, hundreds of people involved with it. Well, I guess maybe in the thousands. I never did get anybody seriously hurt that worked under my management. So I'm very proud of that as well. That is very hard to do.
Especially over a good career that spans the length as yours does.
Yes.
That's really impressive.
And you're dealing with a lot of high temperature, I'm talking about burn possibilities. And a lot of the type of welding we did, scarfing and burning, this sort of thing. And I'm very proud of the fact that no one got seriously hurt.
Were there any conflicts that ever occurred between management, workers, and unions?
Oh, you're going to have some misunderstandings. Again, one of the things that helped me was the fact that I had worked as a craftsman, and I understood what the union rules were, and I knew what the job assignments should be in regard to who does what type of work. And yes, there would be occasionally grievances and this sort of thing, but what the good part about it was that I was able to sit down and discuss the issues and work out without majority of them going on to a higher level of grievance. I only recall one case that went to arbitrator, and that was over a dismissal, unfortunately, that the gentleman was sleeping. And he was a security inspector and had a gun, and he was sleeping. So that was a dismissal for cause, and that's the only case I ever had to go to arbitrator. The rest was able to settle in some manner prior to going to that. So it takes a lot of give and take. You've got to be willing to listen. You've got to be willing to negotiate, and you got to understand where the other people, what they're saying, and where they're coming from. Then you work toward resolving the issue, and that's I'm happy to say I had good results.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Were you picking that up?
Yeah, a little bit.
Let's talk about women at the facility. What sort of roles did women working at K-25 have?
Well, there are days that I'd have to say that probably wouldn't have been successful if women hadn't been there as far as time frame and completion of the Manhattan Project. They did some tremendous amount of work. And in later years, they had opportunity to come in to work in various jobs. And I felt it went well. There's women that wound up in the craft positions, that wound up in operations, wound up in every job out there, I guess, eventually. And those were qualified. Majority of them did a great job, and they're to be commended.
Initially, did they serve? I mean, was there just like a certain job role or something that women initially fell into, or is the typical?
Well, initially, I guess the old school of thought was that clerical and this sort of thing, and that's it. But then it began to bring people in the stores department, stores being materials locations, into operations, and eventually into the maintenance end. And we had, I'm happy to say, we had some very good electricians, lady electricians, maintenance mechanics, welders. They did well. So I was very proud of those folks. They worked hard. Many felt like they had to prove themselves. I never considered it that. I said, if you're qualified for the job, that's what counts. But they did well, and I'm very happy to say that very proud of those ladies.
Okay. What about African Americans and minorities? What sort of job roles did they serve at the plant? How were they treated?
Well, I'm not happy about having to say this, but initially, the role that African American men and women were in the janitorial, and men as well, but the only African American men that were in positions when I was there was either in roads and grounds, which was a similar labor job. Some maybe like our tool, he had similar skill, and otherwise had built up some experience over the years, or added when he came. Cement finishers and this sort of thing. They weren't given the opportunity to get into craft jobs or into operations or other jobs. Now that all changed. You know, I left in 1961. Those were the conditions. I came back to K-25 in later years, and that had changed due to civil rights and otherwise. But you know, my personal thought is it was long overdue on changing much earlier. But bottom line is that by and large, most of those folks, you know, they did just as well as anyone else. Went through the training programs, you know, just the same as anyone else. You either did or didn't. You know, you had certain requirements to meet as far as blueprint reading or this sort of thing in the crafts. But some very good craft people turned out, both male and female African Americans. But I'm happy to say they were able to go ahead then and bid into other jobs. I was personally able to, some qualified folks, promote those myself, and I'm very glad to do so.
Okay, good. Let's see. Were you married at the time that you were working at K-25?
Yes.
Okay. What was life like for your spouse and children? Was it?
Well, I think maybe I'd expand a little bit on shift work if you haven't heard about shift work.
I haven't. So, yeah,
okay. Majority of the time, particularly if you were hourly folks, as I was when I first went in, you would be assigned a shift because of lack of seniority. So this was 3 shift, 7-day rotation, and it's not easy. It's particularly with a growing family or small kids, or some folks just cannot tolerate it. We actually had some people quit because they couldn't handle it, couldn't sleep, you know, when they should be sleeping. But it's kind of a situation that you get on a rotating shift. You know all the people. It kind of turns out like a family. In those days, you had recreation committees, and one for each shift. You have maybe several hundred people involved in it. Softball, bowling, you know, bingo, whatever, and it was kind of tough on your families growing up, especially because there's events that you would miss, you know, working evenings or otherwise, your kids involved, and you had to try to compensate on that when your time off and get into quality time you could. So that was tough on growing, you know, young families. But it worked well. It's still, you know, in the 50s you had your canteens in K-25 and K-27, and again you got canteen in a running process building, which, you know, would never happen in today's world. So there's some of the difference. But it was interesting. I personally like shift. I'm a night owl, and I like the 12-to-8 shift. And most people just hated it, you know. Just oh my. But anyway, it was. You got to learn to make the best of what you got. You know, you've heard the old saying: if you got lemons, you make lemonade. Well, if you got shift, you got shift, and you make the best of it. And quite frankly, I enjoy it. A lot of people don't. But in more recent times, they've gone to a 4-shift, 12-hour workday, which is much better. Much better for families and the whole bit. So
it sounds like you have given the shift work speech to employees before. I'd heard of shift work before from sometimes in the previous interviews I asked, well, what did you like least about working there? and I hear quite often is, oh, I really didn't like shift work.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get the most thorough answer from you on about what shift work was. So thank you for bringing it up, because I almost forgot to do that. Was your spouse supportive of your work? Family supportive?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Very supportive.
Let's see. These are sort of kind of some broader perspective type questions. Describe for me what you think that future generations should remember about K-25.
My personal thought about K-25 and what people should remember is what it really took to make it happen, as far as people, the material, the manpower, the engineering aspect of it, and a tremendous amount of hard work and desire, and say we will succeed. I personally feel like there should be a portion of K-25, small portion left for future generations. I think we should somehow find the money to do that, even if it's only one cell. Now, you know, there was a cell there that Roosevelt was coming to see. That would be a good one to save for future generations. You know, there's nothing impossible. We know nothing impossible. We know we've gone in before and cleaned these material out of these things inappropriately to where the people wouldn't be exposed. It needs to be done, and we need to start now.
Tell me, since you brought up the Roosevelt cell, what do you know about the Roosevelt cell? I've heard several things about it, but any interesting things you know about the preparation of it, or why he never made it? Or?
I don't really know why he didn't make it, but the Roosevelt cell itself, what it did, a lot of preparation, you know, clean up, fix up, paint up, identify by what particular items were within the cell.
Okay, pretend for someone that has no idea what the Roosevelt cell is, can you give me a complete description?
The Roosevelt cell would be comprised of compressors and converters, which are located within what's called a cell. Now, the Roosevelt cell itself would be, in this case, let's see, one of 10 converters, compressors, and so forth. You have part of your pumps and motors showing on the outside, and part of it's on the inside of a wall. It actually, the pump sets in a wall, and there's a rubberized type seal that goes around this thing and bolts up and sealed off airtight. Each of these cells initially were all airtight because they had no clue as to what was going to happen. So, you know, therefore you welded up every seam, you did this, you did that. But you had access points that were still had seals you could go in and out of for maintaining, checking. But the Roosevelt cell itself, you would have markings on the piping itself, flow directions, whether this would be a depleted line or whether this would be an A or B line and this sort of thing. And this is basically the direction of the flow and the stream is going, or stream coming off. So it would be the cell itself would show the public as to what was in each of these buildings, for this entire U-shaped building. So it would be, to my opinion, it needs to be preserved, absolutely.
There was something in there also that you mentioned that you have some insight about, and I just want to ask you, and I've heard different recollections of the Cascade, and some people have said that, you know, absolutely it had to be completely airtight, and I've heard other recollections from other people that said no, it wasn't airtight. We tried to make it as close to airtight as possible, but it wasn't. And I just heard from you're saying that initially everything had to be airtight, and then as they figured out, you know, it wasn't quite as critical as it would be initially before they knew how the system was going to work out. Is that
okay? Now, when I spoke of a cell being airtight, I'm speaking of the cell housing. The cell housing itself. Now, the process piping and the pumps and the compressor and converters, you wanted those as possible. The goal was to be totally airtight. You didn't want to put wet air in the system because that created you some problems. But unfortunately, if one considers all of the valves and all of the piping and the connections and the joints within this, even though they're weld joints, many of them, majority of piping is well, all piping is. It's directly within the flow. You still might have a leak. And in certain conditions, you might pull air in from the outside into the pipe called wet air. So you wanted to avoid that. But in the preparation prior to ever starting, it's really amazing the length they went to clean the inside of the piping and the other things. You know, they had people lint-free rags. They wouldn't even let them use vacuum cleaners. They went in with lint-free rags and wiped these out prior to fitting them up and sealing them together. If you were handling the piping and stuff and going to have inside, you would have to have gloves, rubber gloves or some type on. So it was virtually lint-free, oil or grease-free. Oil or grease was a severe problem to get in. So that was the goal, to shoot for those, but you wanted to be as airtight as you could within the cascade system. Now the housing itself, they found that later didn't matter. The housing itself was for the fact if it should leak, and this would keep it from getting out into the atmosphere and on out into the whole world. Okay?
Okay, thank you for the clarification on that. Let's see, let's go ahead and flip the tape real quick. I've actually, the questions I got left are just kind of broader perspective.